All right, we're ready to get started. I don't know if anyone else felt the same thing I felt towards the last portion of our dialogue. It feels like we're leaning into a bit of reality and rubbing up against the tensions that we already knew were there. There's a reason why we're struggling as a country, as a nation, and probably globally, but certainly as our own nation with the issues that we're struggling with. As if the vital conditions weren't enough, now we get to layer in racial and economic injustices and the legacies that are a part of the founding of our country, quite frankly. I like to use the expression, the air that we breathe and the water that we swim in. Someone referred to the analogy of the fish. All right, you ask the fish about the ocean and the water, and he's like, what water? They're so present and ubiquitous, all right, that we don't even fully recognize and cognize them. All right, and they're the bedrock of our communities. They are the systems of inequities. They are the producers of poor health and the lack of well-being. And we can't get hopeless about them, but we can get serious about them. Part of the issue is that it requires us to step up to a level of awareness, recognition, and acknowledgement that does not feel good. That if we were to truly let in the suffering that we know exists, it breaks our hearts. But we are doing things in spite of and because of that suffering. We just get to formulate a little deeper analysis, greater understanding, greater proximity to embolden ourselves and gird ourselves for what's ahead. And we've got a panel of folks here who are doing that. They may not articulate it that way or see themselves that way, but they are. And we need these examples as we continue to evolve our understanding, our knowledge, our depth, and our capabilities. And so we're going to start off, and each of them is different. Each community is different, just like your communities are different, all right? Rural, urban, suburban, addressing these issues in small and large ways. And we're going to start off with a gentleman who his life, both personal and professional, embodies a legacy and a commitment to equity. And we're going to introduce him with a video. And so we've got a video, and then he's going to come up and share a little bit of his story directly with you. But let's start off with the video. Allow me to introduce Reverend Richard Joyner of Conestoga Valley, North Carolina.
Amen.
Amen.
Thank you. I'm excited to be an awesome opportunity and privilege to share. And thanks to this great panelists here and all of you here. I've been really rich. Just a little bit about this whole process, and I often have to thank the why I'm here. The why I'm here is because of 4 young men that I grew up with that I love, that before I was 40, had lost 4 of my brothers to black on black crime. And I had some choices I had to make. One, why those of us that grew up in this community, why we grew hating each other when we started out loving each other, and didn't understand the impact of what racism had done to us as a people, the anger that it has embedded in us, that for each other. and my own anger. So when I'm at conferences, I realize why I'm here. I'm here because I want to make a difference. And I don't want to bury another person that has been embedded to hate each other. And the whole process of farming that I learned to hate because of black land law. My father, who raised 17 children, and because he could not read and write, he was a brilliant farmer that made his living off farming. And at his death, because a white farmer got him to sign some papers that he didn't know he was signing, we lost the whole farm. And so the pain and anguish that embedded into me, and then being a pastor and a preacher, and then seeing the same principles that was in the Eurocentric church was in the church that I'm pastoring, I breeded a lot of hatred and ended up in a church that anybody ever ended up somewhere you didn't want to be? That God keeps setting you up. I ended up trying to support a 93-year-old pastor, and don't ever try to support somebody 93 years old to set up. I ended up pastoring a church that I funeralized 30 black males every year in a community of 300 people in the population. And it brought back my rage and my anger that once again I'm closing up a coffin on people that should be living. And access, no access. And so I came to see that and had to do something different. And my mama told me I should pray, so I did. God took me back to the soil where my anger was embedded in. That I was reminded of the brutality. And my anger for whites was huge. And so when I came to rooms like this, and I saw people that looked like people that had robbed me, and I had to act like I was happy. And so to look at this, the racism, the legacy, and all this process, and to come back to a place to farm, and little children led me to a farm in Canita. There used to be a 100-acre farm, 200 years in the family, and the Vines family, they had lost 75 acres of black land loss. And this poor guy was about to lose the last 25 acres. And he turned it over to the children. Children was excited about it, I wasn't. They were happy about it, I wasn't. I saw pain, I saw anguish, I didn't see what they saw. And over the last 8 years, because of the vision of those children, there's a legacy of equity that today, that they own 25 acres of land that they have put in a trust farm that will always be in Canita for farming. They also now is 65% sustainable, and that they are raising their food, and this year alone, that they have produced thousands of pounds of food, and they're helping their families out, and they're stopping the burying of black young males who did not have access to human development and local foods. And so it brings me to a place, and to be here today to talk about that there is hope. There is hope. And it taught me how not to run away from my pain, not to run away from my anger, and not to allow my anger to victimize another person, but put my anger to use where it is motivating kids and motivating our community to make a difference and healing what is the worst hurt in me of loss that I can't get back, but gains that I can stop losing. And so I'm glad to be a part of this panel, and I'm glad to be here, and I'm glad to stand here to say that the child in me that were crucified at youth has been resurrected in an old man.
Thank you, Reverend Joyner. So you're going to hear 4 additional stories here. And these stories are meant to seed an open dialogue. And we're going to get to a point where we want to engage you in conversation. So be thinking about what's coming up for you as you're listening and hearing these stories. Be thinking about the questions, because we're only giving them 6 minutes each, and there's no way you can get it all out. So we want you all to kind of go with this conversation, because there's a lot more Reverend Joyner could say about food procurement strategies and systemic and policy issues that he's helped to affect in his community. And he delivered the heartfelt message as his opening. So now we want to turn our attention to Kansas, all right, with Mr. Broderick Crawford, the Executive Director of the NBC Community Development Corporation, and he's going to share his legacies and their traction they're gaining on addressing those legacies of racial injustice.
Thank you, David, and appreciate, again, the opportunity to sit before you to give a little bit of what we're doing in Wyandotte County. And again, to the panelists, appreciate the opportunity to sit with you. So again, I'm Broderick Crawford, the Executive Director of the NBC Community Development Corporation. That's not the role that I'm here to speak about today. I happen to be the co-chair of the Health Equity Action Transformation Community Action Board, which was created by a report that was done by the Kerwin Institute. But before I get into that, I'll share a little bit about Wyandotte County. Wyandotte County is unique because it's only one of 2 counties in the United States that has greater than 25% of 3 ethnicities. So we have greater than 25% African American, we have greater than 25% Latino, and greater than 25% Caucasian. So we have a rich diversity in our county. And the only other county that has 25% in those 3 is Broward County in Florida. So we have significance in our diversity. In our particular county, since 2009, Wyandotte County has ranked last or near last in the county health rankings in the state of Kansas. In the state of Kansas, the University of Kansas Medical Center, arguably one of the best academic and medical institutions in the country, sits in Wyandotte County. But yet we still have the worst health rankings in the state. I want you to think about that for a moment. So we have this heat report that was released in 2016, done by the Kerwin Institute at the Ohio State University, and it's listed on wearewyandotte.com. So I ask that you write that down, wearewyandotte.com. You can actually download the entire report, and there are 17 different videos that are in that report of individuals talking about redlining and racism, systemic racism that has occurred actually across the country, but specifically in how it's impacted our community there in Wyandotte County. So some of the findings that came out of the report, and I'm just going to talk about a few. So in Wyandotte County, there's a highway called 635. Those folks that live west of 635 have a 20-year difference in those that live east of 635 in life expectancy. Your zip code should not determine how long you live, but that's what we're dealing with because of the inequities that has happened there. The red line communities are often those that are underprivileged, they are under financed, under resourced, but yet these continue to happen. One of the other findings out of the report was infant mortality. Wyandotte County has one of the worst infant mortality rates in the state of Kansas and one of the 5 worst rates in the country. Now let me bring this home for a little bit. We started working on this and we've launched a program called Every Baby to One. And in my church, after we started this, I found out that 12 women in my church have lost children between 0 and 1, but it's never talked about. My own mother lost 2, and I didn't find that out until last year. And I'm 50 plus today. It wasn't talked about. The former mayor of the city's wife lost a child. So it goes across the scale, across the board, but yet it's not talked about. We'd rather put more funding in things that don't have significance in our county as opposed to infant mortality. What is the impact? We have a situation right now. There is a business owner that currently has a business on Minnesota Avenue, one of the primary areas. He went to buy a home in an area called West Heights. In those home documents, it said in 2016, for white people only. In 2016, documentation that states for white people only. But we've come a long way, right? We also have a situation as it relates to our legal system. There's a young man that was in prison for 23 years for murder he did not commit. And you say, how did that happen? Because the police officer, then became a detective, was asking sexual favors of this child's mom in the police station. So she had to go to the police station, provide sexual favors for him, or her child went to prison. 23 years this went on untouched, untalked about. And finally, we have a situation where there's a church, my home church. We bought a property there. My church is unique in that we are in the urban core. Since my current pastor has been there, it's New Bethel Church, by the way. He's been there for 9 years, and we've had over 100 new members every year for the last 9 years. Our largest percentage of our church is millennials, 18 to 35, so we're doing pretty good. We bought a piece of property and got a loan because we're going to build a community center. In that community center, let me back up. So we got the loan, had our appraiser come out, he looked at our current building, and he said, you guys have done well. This building has appreciated. Okay, doing pretty well. He said, but 24 hours after you open the door on your new facility, it will depreciate 50%. Get that again. Current building appreciating, new building depreciates 50%. So what's the response to this? We've created what's called the Health Equity Action Transformation Community Action Board. This is an action board of over 60 community residents and organizations that come together monthly to meet on different issues that are occurring in Wyandotte County so that we can change the narrative. Now, one of my colleagues who's here with me talked about what does giving the power back really mean. So we often talk about collaboration, but do we really understand the difficulty that it is in collaboration? Because guess what, when you bring people together, even though they may have the same goals, they may not want to reach it the same way. And when you bring people together, okay, who's in front, who's in back, who's leading, who's not leading? All of those issues have to work out. And when you have people, particularly nonprofits, when you have one person running the organization, guess what? They're used to leading, okay? But we learned something. Leadership is not an activity. It's not a position, it's an activity. In order to lead, you got to do something. And what we did was bring people together in a collaborative way to make change. What are the changes that we're doing? We have a program called Servicing Lips because it's a play on what politicians often do is give what? Lip service. So we have Servicing Lips, which is legislative interaction producing positive solutions. And so with this group, we have both seniors, we have middle-aged folks, we got folks from all 5 generations that come together to talk about what's important. Literally just recently, last Tuesday night, we held a candidate forum where individual youth was involved in the political process. We know that when we get people involved, we can make a change. We know that when we give them the space to do what they need to do, to let their voices be heard, that change can happen. Change is very difficult and it takes a process. As I share with them all often, we didn't get here overnight. And guess what? We are not going to change everything in a week. But together, if we stick through it, even my partners that are here with me at the table, we had to come together to work out some issues amongst ourselves. And guess what? We worked together. But we had to come together and work through that because the commitment to change is more than somebody's name on a building. And I heard earlier, get shit done. That's what we need to do in our communities, is get it done. And it's not about a name, it's not about an organization, it's helping those people who traditionally don't have voices at the table. One other program that I want to talk about is Come Walk With Me. So in many of our neighborhoods, folks used to often ask me, Robbie, why do you walk in the street? Well, where I grew up, we didn't have sidewalks. So guess what? We walked in the street. So now we've taken youth from middle schools and have them do street audits where they're identifying where it needs a curb, where it needs a sidewalk, where grass has overrun the curb, where it used to be bricks and now it's sticks. And guess what? They made this communication to our public works department, and when they've gone for funding, guess what? They're now changing where the sidewalks go in because of the involvement of these youth with this particular project. So as we talk about redlining, and I heard several comments about the redlining and what's happening in this country, what we have chosen to do is indeed give the power back to the people. We have chosen to bring together groups of organizations in a collaborative way to make change in this country. One of the things, and you'll see this when you watch the videos that I'll say, and I'll close with this. Just think about this. We can use the analogy of you have one ox, and that ox is pulling a wagon. That ox can pull a great deal in the wagon. But if you put a second ox with that first ox, they can do 10 times the work. And I encourage and I challenge you, why are we still acting like single ox in this country, in this room? It's time for us to rally together. It's time for us to come together. It's time for us to advocate and collaborate to get shit done. Thank you.
All right, we're only 2/4 of the way through. We already got a call to action. Thank you, Mr. Crawford. So none of this should sound or feel unfamiliar, because if we were to turn to each and every one of you and to have you all identify what are the legacies of injustice within your own communities, how many of you would be able to identify either something similar to what you've heard or another story we haven't even heard yet? Let me see the hands. Well, that's what we're going to do actually right now. We want to allow you all at your tables to pair up and with one another to talk about a legacy of injustice that you know about either through data or through direct observation. It doesn't have to be, something highly complex. Matter of fact, we're only going to give you about 5 to 7 minutes, but kind of talk about the legacy of injustice that exists in your community, in your neighborhood. And then we're going to hear some more stories from the rest of our panelists. So take about 5 minutes, find a partner at your table, and have that conversation around a legacy of injustice in your community. We return to the group. We want to continue with our panelists, and I want to introduce Dr. Lena Hatchett, She's the Director of Community and University Partnerships at Loyola and the co-founder of Proviso Partners for Health in Chicago, or actually just outside of Chicago, and doing incredible work, a part of 100 Million Healthier Lives in the Scale communities. And so, Dr. Hackett.
Hello everyone, it's good to be sitting up here to share some of the stories and the successes that we have from Proviso. Some of you have got to meet and greet our youth leaders who are standing in the back. Guys, can you wave? So Proviso Partners for Health is a 100 million lives scale community. And I tell you that because it has been transformational for our community and for my own leadership. Like some of you who are working in community, we did a lot of very good feel-good work. We are community-led and driven, so there's a lot of voice and power there. But we were running around in circles, doing good things and then moving to the next good thing and not making a deep impact in our community. Our cornerstone work is on urban agriculture. And when you look at the map of our community, Maywood has the highest health disparities, high poverty, and predominantly African American. Right north of Maywood is a community called Melrose Park. And that has the same population, same level of poverty, but not nearly as much blight. I don't think we've talked about black and brown issues in this space today. We had to start asking the question about urban agriculture. How is it that two communities with the exact same poverty level, the exact same population, one has a plethora of stores, businesses, services, opportunities, and Maywood, predominantly African American, has no stores, no businesses, no opportunities. And as we started to answer those questions, we could not ignore race, racism, privilege, and power. Right? And we wanted to be successful, so we had to look at the truth of what we were dealing with. And Maywood is not unique. You will see African American communities across the country with no ownership, no black-owned businesses, no black-owned stores, no black-owned goods and services. And we had no choice but to deal with that, even if we didn't want to. In my role as community and university director, it gave me some opportunity to really engage with the community. And at the start of my work, I sat in my office, I read the research and the literature and tried to find the best models, and I wrote a grant. And I think some of you might have experienced this. Once I put it together, I set up shop, nobody came. And the short answer to that is, I didn't once go into the community when I started. I didn't buy gas in the community. I didn't eat lunch in the community. I didn't buy bottled water in the community. I had no idea who or what that community was about. So I set up for failure. How can we think that we can transform people and neighborhoods that we don't know? And that experience, luckily, transformed the way that I work. It wasn't good enough to sit in my office and read the literature and write grants. I had to really listen and be a part of the community. So I want to tell you about shared power and leadership, and some of you have talked about that and asked about what that looks like. It's right there, hiding in plain sight. And the part about shared power and leadership means that I had to change the way I work. I had to operate differently. And if you want shared power and leadership with the communities that you're working in, you better change too. You have to look at who's leading the work, who designs the operations, who implements the work, who evaluates the work, and who disseminates it. And I'm talking fast because I think I have my 6 minutes. Proviso Partners for Health has a beautiful process of shared power and leadership that is dynamic and functional. So power is in the places in the budget. So don't tell me you're making an impact in community or you're engaging community. Show me on your budget line where the money is allocated. I'm proud to tell you I could share our budget publicly in the news because 15 people evaluated and determined and scored how every single dollar was spent. The grant money that we have comes from community, and so it is invested back into the community equitably. And so we don't have problems around budget. When it comes to the worker-owned cooperatives that we've created, and I mentioned this in some of our groups, we look at the assets within our community, people's skills, people's dreams, people's hopes. And if you want to understand your community's dreams and hopes, think about your own. What drives you to do the work that you do and be here today? Those are the same dreams, goals, assets, and skills that our community has. And in Proviso Partners, we've been able to leverage those opportunities. We've created 3 worker-owned cooperatives. We have 9 in the works. We've had a recent funding agency come and check us out, and they're changing their criteria to fit and support us, rather than us running around begging for money from funders. There's a lot that I could say in our 6 minutes, but I want to tell you that transformation is possible, change is possible, but that means we have to change ourselves and how we work in our systems, as well as ask our community to change. We've learned a lot from the scale leadership development, but our academics aren't just learning how to change. We have created a community leadership academy. So our community leaders are transforming. They're our evaluators. They're doing our co-design and communications, and they're creating the businesses. We're leveraging the resources from the diverse partners that are needed, but it comes from listening, sharing power, and leadership in a way that transforms how we work and that can transform our community. I want to tell you that it's not as hard as we're making it out if we're truly, authentically committed to sharing power and leadership. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Lena. And building on that 1-2 punch of sharing power and transforming our own internal systems and organizations, I want to pivot over here to my new good friend, Steve Tarver, CEO of the Greater Louisville YMCA. And you know, he's towed a line for quite some time in Louisville around transforming you all's system within the YMCA. So you want to tell the audience about that, Steve?
Well, thank you. Thank you, and as others have said, I'm honored to be here. I find myself being the person that Reverend Joyner looks at with anger and anguish. And I hope that through these kinds of dialogues, we can reconcile that as we proceed into the future. So I'm grateful to be here today. And my story is of a community and a personal and professional journey of transformation. I would use a similar word that has been used earlier. But first of all, taking a look at, and I'll tell you, every story that I'll mention has a story behind it, and it's hard to get that in 6 minutes. But in any case, taking a look at the legacy or the history side of that, the Greater Louisville region has a deep economic culture of tobacco, alcohol, and poverty that lead obviously to serious negative health demographics. We have statewide a challenge of urban versus rural communities. Of course, the decline of the coal industry has brought statewide ramifications to our entire Commonwealth. We have and then back to Louisville, we have a very historically significant area of town. In our area, it's West Louisville. There's even a road, the 9th Street. West Louisville goes from 9th Street to about 40th Street. 9th Street is known as the 9th Street Divide between the more affluent communities and the more vulnerable communities in Louisville, and but has a very significant history, but many data points that will show significant health and demographic challenges around economics and education, etc., that deserve attention. We have high racial tensions, mostly between blacks and whites. Even though our community grows more diverse, that is more rooted in our history. And concerns about whitewashing history, concerns about systemic oppression, which you've heard about. Police relations are on our agenda. And of course, as you've heard, institutional racism, including a history of redlining, particularly in this West Louisville community. And also, as you've heard from others, significant concerns about the lack of wealth building and asset protection among minorities in particular, and reflecting either gains or losses in power and independence. So fast forward that to 2007, and I'll add my personal journey to this in a conversation I had with someone I hope that some of you have met, Dr. Adewale Troutman. He's a hero and a friend of mine. Sorry, the older I get, the more I seem to do this. But in any case, and he's sitting helping me write a grant about health. He says, Steve, you know what I would do if I could do one thing to improve the health of our community? Of course, I'm a YMCA guy for the last 45 years. Much of my experience has been on the health and well-being side of the Y. But I'm thinking more health walks, more fitness testing. You know, I've spent 25 years of my career with skinfold calipers chasing people around and say, Reverend, let me pull up your shirt and let me pinch you in a few different places and I'll tell you something you probably don't want to know anyway. And he said I would improve the high school graduation rate. Transformational. He also introduced me to the World Health Organization definition of health, which goes beyond the absence of illness or infirmity into the thriving, harmonious balance of spirit, mind, and body. 3 words that also exist in the international mission statement of the YMCA. And at the same time, he was creating the first municipal center for health equity in the country, maybe still the only one. And so that changed my entire trajectory over the past 10 years. I cannot overstate the transformational nature of that for someone who was invested in a particular thing. It brought us to places we've never understood, we'd never imagined ourselves to be as a YMCA. For example, just because I'm not sure what you might think when you hear the term YMCA, I'm not sure what flashes in your mind, but it's probably not education at the top of that list, and it's probably not necessarily food security, 2 words that I didn't even know went together in the same sentence when I had this conversation. But our YMCA did 7 corner store conversions based on a program out of Philadelphia that took us places that we never realized we would be. So again, continue to do that. And I'm here with a colleague, Rashad Abdur Rahman, who is the director of our Metro Government Office of Safe and Healthy Neighborhoods. We would not even have been in the same room even 5 or 6 years ago without this journey having brought these various points together. But we looked at things like community integrated health. And I happen to believe that that's the future of health care, as opposed to sick care. It takes us from not just simply not being sick to a thriving quality of life, and I think health care is what we've been talking about here, whereas sick care or treatment is something that's very critical to that, but is not necessarily health care. I hope I don't get myself in trouble with anybody by saying that. You know, also a focus on root causes, which you've heard about, so I'll simply do a commercial for the Center for Health Equity in Louisville's recent health equity report to the community. We have about 100 copies of that, and we'll throw it on a table up front here, and if you'd like to grab a copy, please help yourself. The idea, and this is a personal editorial comment, the idea of a need for a focus on behavior change, and I don't believe we can morph medical treatment into behavior change. I think we need to build separate infrastructures for that. Obviously, I got educated on the issue of equality versus equity, and I've realized that many of the policies in my organization, the YMCA, are built around equality, not equity. We're looking at ways that we can bridge that and figuring out how we can actually do it legally when you get into employee systems and things like that. We understand that the choices people make are the choices people have. Everybody doesn't have the same opportunity for the same choices. Another transformational concept for me. And the big paradigm shift, and when we talk about doing it together and with shared power, is we have to look at ourselves from the outside in, not the inside out, which is the way I spent most of my career. So even with the color of my hair the way it is, an old dog can try to change at least. And we recognize that we will not move the community health needle unless we move it among those that are most vulnerable in our communities. So where's that brought us, our current journey? We don't have the answers. We're on a journey. We're excited about what we're doing, but we have much more to learn. But our YMCA, this is the 165th year of service in our region for our YMCA. And right now we have a school and a YMCA, we have an elementary school and a YMCA in one building because of the inextricable relationship between health and education. And I just got an email today, this morning, from the chief operating officer of our school system wanting to talk about doing the second one of those, potentially right on the same piece of property that we're building a new community integrated health facility that will have a YMCA, it will have a pediatric and family medicine clinic, it will have a rehab center, it will have a behavioral and mental health services partner, and a branch bank to talk about wealth development and wealth protection. So I would end by a couple of things. First of all, a story. I talked to people about, we're building a brand new state-of-the-art facility in West Louisville. And I've had more than one person, their automatic response is, well, those people can't pay. And I'm thinking, what did I just hear? Did I really hear that? Because at best, that represents a deficit approach to the community. And at worst, it represents the continued oppression and institutional bias of maybe of either internal or intrinsic or extrinsic institutional bias that simply is not longer acceptable. That people would broad brush an entire community like that. And if West Louisville was a city, it would be the 5th largest city in the state of Kentucky. So all that saying, we will not treat our way out of the health challenges that we experience. We've got to do this collaboration. We've got to have shared authority, shared resources. And I'm very optimistic about that. We've had some frustrations with it, with the development, particularly of this new center. It took us 10 years to get the ground broken on it. But we're optimistic and we're hopeful, and we want to help, have the community wrap our arms around us and us wrap our arms back around them in return. So thank you.
Thank you, Steve. I know a little bit about what happens as you get older, and those moments pop up, and the deepening of the quality of appreciation of our relationships and humanity and so forth. And so we want to pivot from the YMCA to King County, Seattle, and the things that they're doing out there. I've had the good fortune of being exposed to some of the work, again, through Scale Communities with 100 Million Healthier Lives. And I want to introduce you to Matthias Valenzuela, Director of Office of Equity and Social Justice, King County. Talk to us about what you guys are doing out there, particularly the interagency and county-wide efforts that you're engaged in.
Great. Thank you, and I appreciate the opportunity to be here and part of this panel, so others have said. Our journey in King County, we've been over 10 years now, and we actually have quite a weight on our shoulders because we're named after Dr. Martin Luther King too, so that's our namesake. So we take that very seriously, and we have, part of our framework is having the 14 determinants of equity, which are the social, physical, economic conditions that we want everybody to have access to, which are very much aligned with the vital conditions that this group is talking about. And we are really working on integrating an equity lens into policies and decision-making, organizational practices, and how we work with community. And have increasingly been kind of refining our approach. And now more and more jurisdictions, cities and counties around the nation are doing this work, and there's some national networks around this, so it's very significant. One of the things that is really valuable for us too is that we actually do have an ordinance in 2010 with our current executive came in, we passed an ordinance, and early on in the sessions we were talking about working across political lines, and that ordinance was passed unanimously by, it was majority Democrat, but it was 5 Democrats, 4 Republicans in our county council. So that really is the law in the county and driving that. But really, I'm going to just start talking a little bit about myself too, and my story, because I think, as we've been talking about, it is personal. This work for me is quite personal. I'm from Chile. I immigrated to this country. I had to leave Chile during a time of a lot of turmoil, the beginning of dictatorship, and I got kind of dropped into with my family too, but into the school system in Southern California, the public school system. And in 4th grade, my first interactions with the school system was having a white school teacher, Miss Douglas, who, given I was quiet in class, I wasn't participating, I wasn't learning much, wanted to put me in a learning disabled class, right? I have a strong mother who actually advocated for me in that situation. But for me too, as a child really at that point, I was quite alienated. I even got into a lot of trouble. I was caught stealing at the local convenience store, at the Safe, at the Sears. I put a rap sheet, got arrested for vandalism, was in a cop car very early on. So those were on the one side, right, all that kind of confusion. And the other part of that, actually, that was the most exciting and interesting thing that was actually happening in my life. The relationships I developed with some of the friends back then are still relationships that I have today. On the other hand, though, too, I had some support and protective factors, right? I had certain economic privilege. I also had a very strong family and other things that allowed me to really succeed and come out okay on the other side. And at that point, I didn't really know how to differentiate between those two forces, right? The naysayers on the one side, and all the forces that push you down versus all the ones that actually push you up. But with time, I think, and through this work, I've gotten to really understand that. For going back to the work now with the county, I've been at the King County government for 18 years, and our work has really evolved in that period. When I was first hired into one of our departments in the year 2000, I was asked to be in the diversity management committee, and how do you actually manage diversity? And I was very uncomfortable in that particular space because I realize, and that's what a lot of organizations and institutions have done, is you can actually do diversity work or culture competency work all day and actually not make any difference because you're not fundamentally changing the root cause of problems. And I'm very thankful that we've had a kind of the core of folks in leadership and at different levels of the organization and the community that have really pushed for an approach that looks more at systems of power, privilege, and resourcing, which is extremely important. In our region, really kind of the equity, that we do have an equity imperative in the sense that you probably know in the Seattle King County region, we have great industry, the Microsofts and the Boeings, but we actually have some of the greatest inequities in the nation because we have predominantly white, very wealthy population that's doing really well in the communities of color that are lagging behind. So really for us, King County, it's so important to actually have this piece central to the government that we are trying to run. And fortunately, for the last 10 years, it has been a central priority for King County. It remains, and I think this was some of the things that have been brought up around the equity imperative, is for us, for example, when a youth in South King County is, and a youth of color, for example, less likely to finish high school, more likely to be incarcerated and have contact with police, less likely to get a good paying job. And then at the same time, we have these industries that are looking nationally and even internationally to attract talent. There's a cost to that, there's a real cost to that. And we are making some real efforts with our various partners to actually get everybody on board with that particular issue. I want to talk a little bit about kind of equity and even the definitions. Yesterday, Angela Blackwell talked about the Equity Manifesto and expressed the very powerful definition of equity that's in there too. And we, through our process of working with communities and working through with our employees, we've come up with our own definition of it. And I think one of the key themes that comes up in our definition is that we say that equity is an ardent journey defined by those most negatively affected. So really actually having those very authentic conversations internally within our organization. We have an organization of 14,000 employees, and then with the community is what really drives our work. When we developed the latest framework or plan that we have is an equity and social justice strategic plan. When we developed this plan, we talked to over 100 community organizations. And this, we actually hadn't put any pencil to paper or pen to paper before we started writing. We needed to have these conversations without really knowing what we're going to say. And we talked to over 100 community organizations. We talked to 700 of our employees too. And we knew we wanted to make sure we were getting the voices of the frontline staff, for example. We needed to talk to our bus drivers, to our park maintenance people, to our clinic staff, people who are really on the front lines. And what we heard was not pretty, right? We brought back those words from our employees and presented those to our senior leadership team, to our cabinet, our directors, and we actually had some people even in tears to realize that, hey, here we are, have an organization that is espousing, saying that being a champion of equity, when in fact some people who are most disenfranchised within our organization actually are having a miserable time coming to work every single day, based on the fact that they're women, that they're people of color. So for us, as we continue to do 10 years in, we continue to go deeper and deeper within the organization, making sure that we really embody some of the principles that we're talking about. I think what's so powerful about in terms of institutions or government about doing such deep and authentic engagement for us is now that those voices and ideas from community employees, and that's what is in our plans and our policies and in our framework, it's their thinking. And for me now too is I feel a personal responsibility when we're doing the work to actually report back and show that we're making progress to those people that we've been able to talk to. We have a pretty, I think, bold plan at this point, and our work cuts across all kinds, all our agencies and all the departments and agencies actually have to be, including the courts and our sheriff, have to be aligning themselves with this particular plan. But really the work that, it's about over an 80-page plan, but really what we don't get to in the work that we do every single day is the more serious culture change work that has to happen and challenging those systems of white supremacy, systems of privilege. That's really where the work comes in and the pushback that we get every single day, right? And that's the work that we're really pushing. In our community, I think, now that we have this framework, we have all kinds of examples of things that we're able to do. One is we have a voter-approved levy, the Best Starts for Kids, which focuses on early childhood development, and it's tens of millions of dollars that goes to early childhood development. And there's also a place-based initiative that we do with a partner that's here in the room too, with the Saddle Foundation, really with community at the lead. More recently too, now we've moved our juvenile detention area into within public health. So really moving from a punitive approach to actually having a public health approach. And I have to say that we haven't done that just on our own. It's actually been done thanks to some very serious opposition and voices from the community. We're building a new children and youth, or children and family justice center, and there's been a lot of opposition to that, and Black Lives Matter movements and others that have actually forced us. And I think it's a good thing for us to be in those uncomfortable situations and be responsive to the community. A lot of times I think there's a lot of interesting equity definitions and those kinds of things. Sometimes I say the most fundamental thing that we can do is actually be responsive to the community. And if you're actually being responsive to the community, that's what equity work is really about. We've also set internally all kinds of goals. For example, even though we have an anti-affirmative action law in our state, we are setting aspirational goals and tracking those in terms of racial diversity, especially in the top pay ranges where we are least diverse. But I think at this point, probably some of the biggest challenges that we face is that personal work, which I've kind of referenced, and really healing and restoring from our systems of racism and oppression. And we need to really kind of draw the connection between the personal and the systems. We are trying to change systems and structures, but the change doesn't happen with those strong and robust relationships that we need to have, really. And we're trying to make policy and environmental changes, but we can't do those without actually having our boots in the ground, right? Being, rubbing shoulders with our frontline employees, being in the community. I make some real effort to continuously go out and being in the community, and I ask my staff to actually do the same thing. Even though we have a relatively new plan now that's pushing us for the next 6 years, we are constantly also honing our approaches. And right now, just given the conditions that we see in our county, we can't no longer just talk about communities of color. In our region right now, we need to be very specific. For example, Native people and the U.S.-born Black population has really been decimated, not only historically, but also even in the last 10 years, given the recession, that they have barely even recovered. So we need to be really specific in terms of what we're talking about. I'll just end by saying we the personal component, how important it is. I've increasingly come to the realization that we need to really model this work, and really in our actions and our action relationships, really with compassion and love. I would really that's been talked about early this morning. I mean, to see those and the systems and structures we want to see in society as a whole. And with people at the center, and the people are the systems, right? Those are the systems. Sometimes we talk about the systems as something very abstract. And then really, it is about the head and the heart. And we think about even the conversations and the things that we've been doing today. We've been a lot in the head space. So I think we need to spend a lot of time and actually get into that heart space. And ideally also begin to even break down I like it that in Western culture we talk about those two things separately, but if you look at Eastern culture, for example, in other cultures, there's a deep connection between mind, heart, and body. So in my case, when I was a newcomer, driving back to where I started in the U.S. In an elementary school, I needed the various systems and institutions to support me. And I also needed that teacher. His name was actually Mr. Simon, African-American teacher, to care about me, both kind of here and here. So, yeah, thank you.
Thank you. We've got a little bit of time to, want to acknowledge the impossible task that we gave these folks to share very deep and rich, experiences and sets of experiences and legacies and so forth, and what they're doing about it within an impossible time period. But to create the most value out of this right now, we want to turn to you to lift up something that you heard, that you want to follow up on, whether it has to do with power sharing and proviso or food procurement policies, and with Reverend Joyner's work, or organizational change and development with the YMCA, or any organization, obviously. What are some of the things you heard? What caught your attention? What may be a compelling direction to go with this conversation to lift up the very real realities and challenges of doing this kind of work? You can relate it back to the vital conditions that we talked about earlier. So we want to have a couple of mics, in the room positioned. Where would you like to go with this conversation? What would you like to hear more about or talk more about? Any hands? All right.
Thanks to all the panelists. Wonderful, inspiring stories. My name is Shelley. I'm from Lake County, California, very rural California, the poorest, often the poorest city in the state of California and the worst health outcomes. We've got a lot of great work going on in a lot of the areas that you all mentioned. One of the areas where we have not really leveraged, we haven't pulled a lever, is kind of in the YMCA space. So in the city of Clear Lake, if you decided you wanted to get healthy on a given day, you cannot go to a yoga class, you cannot go swimming, you cannot walk on a trail, you cannot run down the sidewalk, you can't go to a health food store, there's nothing. So if, all the great information in the world about getting healthier is available, you can't ride your bike, a lot of the streets aren't paved. So we've oftentimes looked at the YMCA model. We've done quite a bit of research, and it keeps coming back to us that our community cannot sustain the YMCA model because the demographic shows that there's not enough paying people in the community. So you made a comment that caught my attention where you said expanding your big YMCA program, they said not enough people who can pay, and you said we're not gonna believe that, we're gonna push beyond that, and I would love like a little more substantive detail about what you mean that we might be able to learn from you to leverage, a Boys and Girls Club, a YMCA, something that we could pull some investment in the community that way.
Well, thank you for the opportunity to respond, and I appreciate your interest in an organization like ours. What I would tell you about what we're doing in Louisville, of course, we have a broad delivery system, so we have multiple members of the family that can contribute to each other on occasion. So that is an advantage that we have in the broader urban area. But I will also tell you that we're not doing anything as an independent organization anymore. There's just not enough resources. it doesn't achieve this idea of looking from the outside in instead of the inside out. And so, and we are looking, and I'm a big deal to me is the difference between collaborating and partnering. So I would encourage you to, we have a national YMCA representative sitting right up here that could also be a liaison to some informational resources for you. But take a look at what would the role of a YMCA be in your particular community. It may not be the typical prototype image of a gym and a pool. And secondly, who are other collaborative partners that intersect with the goals that you would have that might bring resources? Because the YMCA doesn't have a public revenue stream of any kind. They are locally owned and locally autonomous from the standpoint of asset development, budget development, and things like that. But there certainly are small communities that have YMCAs, and they're generally done on a collaborative basis. So hospitals, businesses, particularly if there's any larger employers, school systems, and municipal governments are proving to be very significant partners in YMCAs of various sizes all across the country.
I think I lost my mic runner, so I'm going to have to bring the mic to you myself.
Thank you very much, John Ambrose, Trust America's Health. Thank you again for a great panel. I know that one of the issues that always comes up in terms of looking at programs that are working on equity and working against health disparities is it's really hard to get funding. It's hard from either foundations or governments. If you were making a recommendation for what would make it easier in terms of accessing some of the funds so that you could build on the work that you're already doing now, what would you recommend to funding organizations?
I would say value-added funding that can be sustainable funding. And we have, glad that Brittany Jenkins with me, that when we look at grant dollars, we look at value-added and sustainability, because once those dollars come to an end, we want to see those dollars be able to multiply and sustain themselves, and the community be able to maintain the level which we got from the dollars. So I would say a value-added investment.
One of the things I would say too is actually for our first 6 years for King County government, we had no funding actually. It was all we did it with the existing capacity. So I think only in the last 4 years have we had an office and we've had some capacity. But really, we took the approach that this was necessary. We needed to do it regardless of the resource issues. We needed to embed it and integrate it in what we were doing in order to just be successful in our lines of business.
I'll also add something, and I'll give a shout out to Jeff. I think he's still in the room, from the Kansas Health Foundation, which is one of our funders. One of the things that we've challenged our funders is to not look at the way they do funding the same way. Oftentimes they're doing funding to individual organizations and not building capacity. So what does it look like to challenge those grant recipients to partner and collaborate before they even get the dollars? So challenging, asking the funders to challenge who they fund to collaborate, because that's what the difference is. We know that one organization cannot make the difference, so why are we still funding one organization? It's time to do something different. Again, doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results is what? Insanity.
Thank you. And Steve?
Lastly, I would just, similarly, I would say the question to the proposal to the funder should be based on what the community needs, not what a particular agency or organization needs. And that what the community needs would typically require the collaboration that he just mentioned.
Thank you for those responses. We've got time for a couple of comments or maybe a question. And Dr. Stout.
Hi, Shoma Stout, IHI 100 Million Lives. As I heard you all speak, it struck me that you all talked about the importance of trust and relationships at every level. That actually made me wonder if that was a vital condition. And I'd love to hear you reflect on what are the different levels at which trust and relationship might need to be created? Not just the different groups, but how can trust grow based on your experience? And I know listening to the community and doing what they say is one of them, so skip that one.
I'm thinking about the question deeply, which is one of the things that I do when I'm in with our partners to understand what's being asked of me. And I think at a first step, there's a lot of conversation here today about other people and not ourselves. And so I write about, if you want to be heard, you have to listen. And if you want to gain trust, you're going to have to give some. And our structures and our systems take that away from us, take those emotions out of the relationship. We have memorandums of understanding instead of conversations. Self-assessment is a way to start building and maintaining trust. You have to look at your organization and where is it in terms of trust and relationship. We are consulting with some of our organizations who need help with that, and they need to reflect on what is really going on in my organization, what level of trust am I at, and how can I then take a step further. The other piece about trust and relationships is we at Proviso took action and built trust through action, without funding, without a big plan. We didn't just ask and demand trust, we invested in action to demonstrate trust and collaboration. And that has served us very well. It's like we're not just talking about it, we're actually putting skin in the game and doing the work. And then we're not going anywhere. So hopefully we can think about those levels as a community at distinct points in the movements that we're creating. And I think we need to understand the concept of trust and relationship better to do this work.
I will add to that, so I will challenge each of you. Where do you trust? So think about the place or the spaces that you trust. Is your place of trust at City Hall? Is it a boardroom, or is it a kitchen? Is it a dining room? Is it at a barbershop? Is it at a nail salon? Where are the places that you yourselves have a level of trust? And so that's where the community will be. So often we hear, go to where they are. It's really not rocket science. Go to where they are. So if it's the grocery store, guess what? If it's the food kitchen, go to where they are, and don't go just on Thanksgiving. Don't go just on Christmas. Don't go just on Mother's Day. Be committed to be there, because most of our communities, they're used to people coming in, oh yes, I'm gonna come in, and then they're gone. So they're waiting for you to leave. They're sitting back waiting for you to leave. But if you go with the level of commitment, then I'm gonna be here today, tomorrow, 5 years from now, 10 years from now. I'm gonna be here, then you will see them dropping some of their defenses.
I'm going to thank the panel again, if we can give them a hand. And I also want to acknowledge 2 things. One, we have to exit this room pretty expediently, but Dr. Stout, Shoma, I want to acknowledge your question as really striking at the heart of racial and economic injustice, because you're bringing up and raising the human dimension. All right? We know that policy systems and environments are what sustain and maintain the values and principles that we believe. However, it's us as human beings that get to cross over divides and divisions and legacies of hurt and pain and distrust, okay, in order to transform those systems, those policies, and those environments. So I think that's where the real growth is in this conversation, in this dialogue. We can figure out the systems part. You know, but if we can figure out and straighten out the human emotional dimension, we'll get much further faster, all right? And that comes by engaging each other. A good friend of ours from the scale community always says, proximity plus empathy equals equity. The closer I can get to the heart of the issue, not the problem, but the issue, the matter, the people, all right? Not identified as problems, but as where the action is, if you will. Then the more I can better understand. I go back to the story that Courtney relayed this morning when she said something to the effect of, it's hard to fear someone whose story you understand. That's a very key equity principle right there. Thank you all.